This story began in the Listened Empire, namely, in the main square, where a lot of people had gathered. The main character of this story was also present in this square. Her name was Larissa Eros Vistaria. She stood behind everyone and watched the admiring faces of those present. Meanwhile, the very same Grand Duke who had become very famous in their empire finally appeared on the square. But when the girl saw him, she didn't understand what he was doing there at all, because she felt the aura of murder emanating from him. This beautiful man had dark curly hair and golden eyes. He was certainly very handsome and also intelligent, but the girl recognized him from her first glance. This man was Anthem Isaac. She really wanted him not to notice her, so she began to hide among the crowd. But unfortunately, she was unable to do this because the man stopped right in front of her. She thought it was completely impossible for him to notice her, so she continued to hide and run away. After Antenna saw no one in the crowd, he went on further with his red-haired assistant who accompanied him. The girl began to run away from that alley even further. She thought that she would never see him again in this huge empire. However, it didn't work out. Of course, it was a mystery to her how this could have happened, but she was going to solve it a little later. This hatred between the main characters did not happen immediately. It all began 9 years before this terrible, awkward meeting. When Larissa was still a very small child, she decided to go out for a little walk in the garden and draw, because she really loved this activity. After work, her father came to her. He came closer to the girl and said that he was very glad to see her. Her father was Kazak Eros Vistaria. When the girl ran up to him, he took her in his arms and noticed what beautiful pictures she had drawn. In fact, his daughter really loved flowers. And at that moment, this fateful meeting happened. She hugged her father and looked back and saw a tall guy there who was older than her. This man was Antenna, and he was 16 at the time. However, this man was now her fiancé. The little girl was very surprised when she heard this. Of course, it was unusual for her because she was still very little. But when he approached her, Antenna introduced himself and said that it was a great honor for him to meet her, and that he would take good care of her. Of course, she was shy for a while, but soon she greeted the man properly. Well, after that, they were silent for a while. They both felt awkward about it. The father told his daughter that this guy had achieved great results on the battlefield, and at his age had already achieved the rank of Duke. For this reason, he was absolutely sure that this man would be able to protect his daughter, so that she could not be so cruel and cautious towards him. At that moment, Larissa finally took courage and came closer to him. Their gazes met, and the main character then felt something changed in her forever. But since she was still very little, of course she couldn't understand anything. So her face turned red, and she even turned away from the guy. But Antenna believed that it was precisely because of him that she was not going to establish communication, due to the fact that he spent most of his time on the battlefield. He could literally feel how he was radiating an aura of death from himself. But he also asked the girl to be sure to tell him if she ever felt afraid of him. And all because he would like to have a wonderful relationship with her. When he took her hand, Larissa felt different from her father's hand. It was very warm, and from that moment on, she never wanted him to let her go. When he held her hand, it was like sunlight for her, as well as the delicate scent of lilac that enveloped them. For a little girl like her, it was a wonderful meeting of two young people. It was so beautiful and cruel at the same time, because in the end he just disappeared into the silence of the night. Larissa knew quite a lot of interesting facts about her empire. It was great, and the most powerful among all the surrounding countries. She was a country where territorial wars were simply continuous, and her father held the position of great general, so he was often exposed to mortal danger. Since childhood, the girl had been accustomed to having to be left alone. Of course, their hearts were broken when they had to say goodbye. However, Larissa understood everything. Her mother died of illness at school after the birth of a girl, so she was left with only one father who disappeared every time. But after she found out that she now had a fiancé, and after their meeting, Antenna began to come to her quite often, especially when her father was away. The guy simply considered it his duty to visit her and console her in difficult times. He was like a ray of light in the darkness. Of course, at first they felt very awkward even just sitting next to each other, but soon the girl plucked up her courage and asked the guy to give her his hand. A little surprised, the young Duke nevertheless extended his hand to her, and she handed him a small jar of medicine. Of course, he was comforted by the thought that she had prepared it especially for him. This medicine was for his rough and cut hands. She smeared his wounds and said that this was a very effective cure for them. She made a trial batch, and this thing became very popular among her maids. For this reason, she decided to give him such a thing. When she looked at the man, she always smiled a cheerful smile. She considered the Lord simply amazing because he worked so hard that his hands were even in a terrible state. Therefore, it was a great honor for her to be near him and help him with these wounds. But as soon as he heard this, he suddenly frowned and told the girl in a serious voice that these were not at all the hands that she should love. Of course, she didn't understand then what exactly he meant, because despite the fact that the girl had grown up a little, she still remained a child who knew nothing about what was happening on the other side of the front. So obviously she couldn't share his feelings. All she could do was give him the medicine and promise him that she would make more when it was over. The man was very grateful to her, but so that he would not be upset, Larissa looked him straight in the eyes with a very confident voice and said, "I love your hands no matter what." Of course, it was hard for him to believe it, but he thanked her for these words, and after that he left, saying that they would definitely meet again. And so, 4 whole years passed from that moment. As territorial wars began to escalate, the worried Duke decided to speed up their wedding. So when the girl grew up a little and turned 14, she finally married a man and moved into the Duke's house. Their wedding was a truly momentous occasion, and little by little she began to fall in love with this man. He really liked her. Her father was at war and could not come, and Anthem's parents had long since passed away for this reason. This wedding was intended only for the two of them. But even despite all the problems they had to face, the girl was just happy that she could finally become his wife. After they had said their vows, one of the knights suddenly burst into the church. He looked very worried and immediately ran up to the Duke. He said that they had some problems there, so the man had to show up immediately. Of course, the antenna didn't want to interrupt this wonderful wedding, but he simply had to leave. Of course, Larissa understood everything. After all, her father always interrupted and ran away so abruptly, so she said that he shouldn't worry about her, and the man with a clear conscience ran away, finding out what the situation was on the battlefield. Of course, the girl really wanted him to stay by her side. However, she could not be a burden to him, and that is why, no matter how painful it was for her, she had to let the man go. When the man had already run out of the church, he soon returned again. He looked very worried, but considered it necessary to say a few words to the girl before leaving. Antenna ran closer to her, hugged her, and said that he would return very soon. And when he returned, he would like to know if she would allow him to greet her again. Of course, Larissa had already fallen completely in love with him, so she didn't object. The man kissed her hand and said goodbye. All that was left for the girl in such a situation was to pray that he would return safe and uninjured. In her heart, there was still hope that, when the war ended, they could be together forever. So she really hoped that this would happen as soon as possible. However, without her father and the Duke, there was absolutely no one left in the mansion. The maids were very skeptical of the girl and even looked down on her. They didn't want to accept her as the new mistress, so I was left Larissa alone with myself. But nevertheless, she was soon able to rejoice, because after some time her husband finally returned home, and she of course came to meet him. Even his mere presence within the walls of the estate already calmed and pleased her. So Larissa stopped worrying about these maids and everything else. On the day of his arrival, they decided to have dinner together, and the girl asked how he had spent all these days. Of course, she understood that he was probably incredibly busy, but she wondered if everything was okay with him there, because she felt a little abandoned in this estate without him. The man felt very sorry that she had to go through this. He would really like to return home as often as possible, so that she would never feel lonely again. But even when Larissa was so badly wounded, she still smiled in his face and said that she was just happy that he was now home. Of course, the man was incredibly grateful to her for this understanding, after which he asked how her drawing was progressing. After all, she was really doing it very well. The girl managed to make several drawings of plants in their beautiful garden. She really enjoyed making them unique. Therefore, she could disappear there for several hours. Antenna was very happy to hear this. He was glad that without him, she still could not be bored and found the activity that she liked the most. Of course, this was all untrue. everything the girl said was a lie, because life in this estate completely alone without support was simply unbearable for her. However, she simply could not upset him even more. After all, she understood that it was already very difficult for him, so she believed that, knowing that he would return, she would be able to endure all this. And so, several more months passed from that moment. The man again had to leave for this entire period, and when he returned, she met him and greeted him as before. Everything was not as wonderful as it was then, because the man changed a little. He became colder and began to avoid her very often. During the war, he had to tell a lot, so he simply could not allow her to consider him a monster. So he decided to avoid her. Of course, Larissa didn't understand his behavior, but the next day he didn't even show up from his room. Of course, she was very worried. After all, this had never happened before. They could talk for hours about nothing, and they felt comfortable. Now everything changed that day. She could no longer think about anything else except how to improve her relationship with her husband. Therefore, she did not find a better way to deal with the winds and her head than to go to the city with her maid. She arrived in the city center and was happy to be there for the first time in a long time. Larissa went there on special business. She wanted to prepare a gift for the man in order to ask him for forgiveness and show that she was there. For some reason unknown to the girl, the maid was very surprised to hear this. However, she was not going to stop. The girl did not know anything specific about him, so it was difficult to come up with a gift for her. Seeing the confusion on her face, the maid asked what she thought about accessories, since a popular store with all sorts of little things that could be useful had recently appeared. Larissa, upon learning about this, was immediately delighted. She truly believed that this could be an ideal opportunity to find something useful there for her husband. So she was going to go there. Well, as soon as they turned the corner, her heart was broken into many little pieces. And all because there she saw her husband, and next to him stood and giggled some flirtatious blonde lady. The girl could not believe that he did this. Of course, there was still the possibility that she simply misunderstood. However, she was very curious who the lady was who was with him. More than anything, her fear was intensified by the fact that she understood that for some reason they were quite close. Otherwise, the man would not be there and holding her hand. Of course, Larissa couldn't help herself just thinking about it, because she had completely different thoughts. She thought that she simply had to ask him directly. So that same evening, having returned to the estate, we were going to go into his room. But while passing by the maid's room, we accidentally overheard their conversation. The maids whispered and spread the word that the Duke was cheating on his wife and had found a more worthy candidate for a wife. When Larissa heard all this nastiness, her heart broke. She could not believe that their words could be true. Her antennas would definitely not have done that. She wasn't going to stand there and listen to all the dirt they were talking about. So the girl, in agony, simply turned around and started to walk away. Of course, she shouldn't have paid attention to them, because they are just maids. They like to spread various rumors. But for some reason, this thought stuck in her head. Because the man went on his mission again the next day, the girl was unable to come and ask him directly about everything. She kept thinking about whether she should write to her father and ask what he thought about this. But in the end, she came to the decision that she shouldn't have done this. She didn't want to cause him unnecessary worry, since nothing had been confirmed yet. Larissa knew that if this happened and they stopped understanding each other even more, then of course she would tell her father about it. But before that, she had to ask the Duke about everything. So a few weeks later, when the man finally returned home again, the girl was already standing in the hallway and waiting for him as always. However, that meeting was not like usual, because Larissa noticed his hand, and that there was blood there. And of course, at that very moment, she was enveloped in silent fear. She quickly ran up to him and was about to take the man's hand, but she didn't have time because for some reason, he abruptly pulled her aside. Larissa looked at him in surprise. She didn't understand what was happening to him at all, but the antenna only said that everything was fine with him. He could deal with this matter on his own. After which, without even greeting her properly, he left. This caused the girl an incredible amount of pain, and she could not hold back her tears, so that evening she cried for a long time, not understanding what she had done wrong. After this incident, they did not speak to each other at all until his next departure. Larissa did not even go out to say goodbye to him, but only watched from the window as his carriage drove away into the distance. She didn't understand at all why he hated her so sharply, and assumed that it was because she was a useless girl or he was simply tired of her. In any case, she was absolutely sure that there was something wrong with her, and that was why he started behaving like that. But the girl also considered it a big misunderstanding and wanted to sort everything out. But everyone treated the young wife abandoned by her husband with disdain. When she called, no one came to her, and they didn't even serve her food. Thus began the days of her harassment. Moreover, the front lines of the war became even more chaotic. Therefore, the location of the antenna remained unknown in most cases for its own good. In one moment, Larissa's happiness simply collapsed, because even the newspapers reported on the military situation, and people who were journalists were more informed than his legal wife. Gradually, the girl's heart began to tire of constantly worrying and getting upset. So even when the maids came to report on his situation, she simply did not listen. She wasn't interested. She only asked if everything was okay with him and if he was alive. But the girl didn't even want to hear any other details. Larissa lost the spark that was always inside her. She lost a lot of weight during this time, gave up drawing, and didn't even go outside for weeks. The maid informed him that he was supposed to return very soon, but the girl did not want him to see her in such a state, so she refused this meeting. Eventually, the maid realized that she couldn't last long like this, so she asked her what she thought about returning to her parents' house for at least a while. She was the only maid who was worried about her mistress. She saw the state Larissa was in and said that if things continued like this, her life would be in irreversible danger. The lady finally listened to her, but she did not agree immediately. This happened after the maid handed her a small package. It was a gift for the lady. Of course, the girl was very surprised to hear this. She thought that it was probably from her father, so she hastened to open it. Having done this, Larissa noticed that it was a small box. When she opened it, she saw a beautiful decoration and also a small note. In this note, she learned that this gift was from the Duke, that is, her husband, because his handwriting was there. Even if she received something similar now, this kindness was definitely no longer directed at her. She always remembered that beautiful blonde next to him, and she immediately felt bad about it. She knew that the time when they were happy would never return, so she simply closed his gift and put it aside. It was unpleasant for her even to look at it. She had had enough, so she told the maids that she was no longer going to tolerate all this. The girl packed her things and decided to go to her parents' house. But before that, she brought the note and the man's gift to his room. In the note, she wrote, "I sincerely hope that you will always be happy. Thank you for everything." After returning to the family home, some time passed. Of course, it was very difficult for her, but gradually she returned to normal and to her previous state. This attitude of the Lord towards her greatly affected her in a detrimental sense, but the girl really recovered. Of course, she didn't tell her father about the divorce she had concluded with the Duke. She simply said that since she had a lot of free time, she decided to go back for a while. She didn't want to upset him, but the girl believed that perhaps he suspected something because in his letter he was quite ambiguous. But after that, all contact with her father ceased. She learned that the great general of their empire and her father at the same time met an honorable death on the battlefield at the beginning of winter, when the first snowfall began to fall. Of course, the funeral happened quite quickly, but for Larissa this blow was too great. She had not yet fully recovered from the divorce when suddenly a new grief happened. But she returned the ducal title to the country with the money received from the return of property rights. She paid severance pay to the servants and simply sold the mansion. The girl believed that this was the right thing to do. Taking advantage of this wonderful opportunity, A officially filed for divorce. Relying on her father's will, she went to the residence of Viscount Herman, who served under her father. When she met Viscount Herman, the man truly sympathized with her. He believed that it must have been very difficult for her to experience all these events at once. The man was a very tall, charismatic, fair-haired guy. He really showed understanding towards the girl and took her in. He gave her a hot bath with polite maids and allowed her to use his library, so she spent quite a lot of time visiting the Viscount's estate and felt quite comfortable there. After all this time, the girl understood that she could not stay there forever. She needed to do something, to move somewhere in her life. Larissa knew that she had to find a way to earn money on her own, and when she conveyed this idea to Viscount Herman, he said that she had very noble thoughts, but he would at least like to help her find a job. The girl politely refused because he shouldn't have taken care of it. She had to do everything herself. In any case, the man continued to insist on his own, because the girl had already become like a daughter to him. Of course, Larissa did not expect to hear such words. For her, it was pleasant. Thus, 3 whole years passed after the death of her father. She decided that she needed to move on, and as if saying goodbye to her former weak self, she abandoned her old name and changed it to Leo Malbari. Soon after coming of age in the early summer of her 18th year, she started over as a commoner and opened her own herbal shop. Since she loved various flowers and plants since childhood, this became real happiness for her. Pretty good. She was doing well in the store, and now it stood for a whole year. Leah wondered what would happen until she got back on the right track. But now she considered her life simply wonderful. Luckily for her, due to the rise in outsourcing, she was quite busy and had more clients than usual. She even had regular clients whom she recognized from the first time. They were very friendly. One fine sunny day when she opened the store early, a young guy suddenly came to Leah. He was Ronan Cornish, and seeing the girl, he greeted her. In fact, she was madly in love with him. But when she saw him, she was surprised because she didn't think that it was time to go to the garrison. The man noticed that she had been busy all this time, so he apologized for interrupting her. But the girl had even more work to do. She had to sort out new deliveries of grass, and Ron decided to help her with this. For the girl, he was a young man who helped her when she first arrived in this city, and she got lost on the road. From that time on, they became very close friends. He helped her in various ways, for which the girl was incredibly grateful to him, because running a store alone at such a young age was very difficult. That day, she had to go with him to the city center to deliver some products. In fact, Leah really loved this guy because he was kind in nature and close to her in age. He became her very first friend. In order for the girl to be able to go out into the city without anyone recognizing her, she specially invented a special potion that dyed her hair black. And every time before going out somewhere, she repainted them after the girl got ready with the damage. They went there because they were already late. Ron was always amazed at how much hair color could change a person. After all, with black hair, she looked like a completely different girl. She explained to him that she had specially invented a potion that changed her hair color. After all, in their city, there weren't that many fair-haired and light-eyed people, so she always attracted unnecessary attention. Of course, she couldn't tell him the real story, so she made up a similar role that day. He even complimented her. He said that even though she looked beautiful with dark hair, in his opinion, her original look was much more impressive and beautiful. The girl had never heard compliments, even from her husband, so hearing this was incredibly pleasant and unusual for her. After that, Ron told her the latest news about what was happening in the capital. He said that the Grand Duke was wounded after some commotion there, so now everything was hidden. Leah then thought about this, because she had only seen the Grand Duke once and was interested in what could have happened there, since he was seriously wounded and the information was hidden. By the time she had finished all her business, her potion had already worn off, so she had to return to her shop as quickly as possible so that no one would see her. Here we finally come to the moment when Leah saw her husband for the first time after the divorce, and when he almost noticed her. She truly believed that she would never see this man again, but unfortunately this did not happen, and seeing his face again, her heart fluttered again. Sometime before this, they had arrived at the castle and were unloading their goods there. One of the knights came out to greet her. He thanked her for coming even in such cold and asked if he could already take all this luggage. The girl allowed him to do this, and after that, the man asked if he could consult with her about the next order, because it was supposed to be very soon and quite large. She replied that, of course, there were no problems with this, after which he invited her to the estate in order to calmly discuss everything there. She asked Ron to go with her, but the man, for some reason, refused. He told her to get home on her own later. However, she had to be very careful because it all might not even be unsafe. He still decided not to wait for her, and they agreed that the next day he would come to check if everything was okay with her. So the man saddled his horse and rode away, leaving the girl alone. Meanwhile, she was brought into the estate. She sat opposite the knight and thanked him for the order. They were truly very valuable clients. Well, the knight in response only thanked her for agreeing to stay so late. after which he was about to move on to the very essence of the next order, but did not have time because the knight burst into the room. The man was very scared and immediately asked his ward what had happened, but the knight only looked at the girl and asked if it was true that she was a pharmacist. The girl said that of course it was her, but the man still looked very worried. He really needed her help. Of course, Leah couldn't help them because she wasn't a doctor. She didn't know the structure of a human being. She just dealt with herbs. But the knight still insisted. He understood perfectly well that she was not a knight. However, the situation was incredibly urgent, and she was the only one who had at least minimal medical knowledge. The girl didn't know what to do in this situation. She looked out the window and saw that it had started to snow heavily. Then she realized that in such weather it was almost impossible to find a doctor quickly. Since childhood, Leah was a kind soul, so she agreed to go to help. Of course, the knight was immediately delighted. He thanked her madly and did not waste a minute. Immediately took her to the right place. As soon as they arrived, the girl immediately asked if anyone could tell her the situation that had happened, while she examined the knight who was lying unconscious on the ground. The young man decided to tell everything himself. He said that the enemy ran very quickly. However, during the battle, an arrow hit His Excellency's hand. He said that everything was fine and refused treatment, so they hurried back to the estate. But his face immediately began to lose its color, and they of course got scared. Then they ran to this place and he lost consciousness. Then they realized that everything was very serious. The girl, having wet her sleeves, immediately began to examine his wound. She said that this infection was caused by the poison of a mushroom called Yatsurutaki. In fact, this flu was very poisonous. It grew in Eastern religions, and although it was not that deadly, if treatment is not started immediately, the situation could become paralyzed and the patient would lose consciousness, as happened to their commander. She had to act very quickly so that this did not develop into an even worse stage. She asked that they bring her a clean jug, a rag, and a bucket. The knights immediately did this. When they brought everything, the girl washed the wound, after which she began to suck the poison out of her hand with her lips, because there was no other way to get rid of it. When she spat out everything she got from his hand, along with the blood, into a separate bowl, after just a few minutes it had filled up to the very top. After the swelling and redness went away, the girl realized that it was enough. She bandaged his wound and gave the necessary instructions to the knights. His condition was still unstable, and the poison had spread significantly, so it was a matter of time whether he would be able to survive everything that had happened to him. She could not guarantee anything, but Leia believed that everything would be fine with His Excellency. After all, he had already overcome many dangerous life situations, so he should have gone through this one too. Then the knights decided to put him on a stretcher. All this time the girl did not see his face because he was lying on the other side. But now when they put him on the cloth and turned him over to the other side, she recognized this man. And all because it was precisely Lord Anthem. Seeing him in such a state, she was overcome with horror. Past memories and experiences flashed. She could not believe that she had just saved his life. The girl was incredibly confused, so when she was already leaving them, she didn't even say a single word. When the knight asked what had happened to her, she explained that she was simply surprised. After all, she knew that he was responsible for the northern region, so she definitely did not expect to see him in this place. The guy immediately explained everything to her, why he ended up in this particular place. She replied that she understood everything, but she was still amazed that everything turned out this way and they crossed paths. Of course, if she had known that this territory was now under his jurisdiction, she would never have opened a pharmacy there, because she did not want to cross paths with the antenna. For her, this was her greatest fear. She thought that if she left him, he would never come back. And that is why she opened the pharmacy without thinking at all that such a possibility existed. Soon the man was transferred to a room to rest, and the main knight suggested that the girl head to this room in the meantime to talk again. Larissa actually didn't want to get involved with him anymore. However, if she didn't treat him now, he would simply die. Therefore, the girl believed that everything would be fine with her. She would simply treat him and leave. As soon as they entered the room, this girl immediately pulled the hood over her head so that the likelihood of her being recognized would be even less. But Larissa looked at the bed and saw how much pain he was suffering from. She understood that she had to act quickly. So she took the first aid kit, and decided to carry out her procedures. And the wind turned to the red-haired knight, who was also the master's assistant. He thanked his grandfather again and asked for forgiveness for not introducing himself. His name was Elliot Barak. After she introduced herself, the girl finally came up and did the bandage on the man. Everything went well, and she did not notice any side effects. The man who stood and watched her the whole time said that she was quite professional in this matter, but in fact it was true. She was able to learn how to do bandages very well, and all because she often received injuries on her own and learned to treat them. Because living in the forest on the outskirts of the city, there was simply no other way. But she was happy that she had to receive a lot of injuries because she was able to learn this business. Although compared to the soldiers, her injuries are absolutely nothing, and it's scary to even imagine what they all go through. While Larissa sat there and looked at her ex-husband wounded and defenseless, she realized that this was the first time she had seen him for real. Even though they slept in the same bed, she never saw his body. She only knew that he had never been as vulnerable as he was now. He always wore his mask of indifference and self-confidence, but now that had changed. For some reason, when she was near him, something in her chest squeezed, and the girl did not understand why this was happening. She assumed that it was because it was still a little painful for her to see him. While she was sitting next to Intima, his assistant noticed that they had some kind of connection and asked if they really knew each other before. Of course, the girl was very surprised to hear this guy apologize for his false assumptions. He thought that perhaps she was one of those whom he saved on the battlefield. Because of this, she wanted to thank him in this way. The girl said that this was not the case at all. She was just a good Samaritan who decided to help a person in trouble because she had the necessary knowledge. In fact, Larissa never knew what exactly he was doing on the battlefield. She considered him a cold and merciless killer, someone who counted on victory with efficiency and never hesitated to kill anyone. This was the impression the man made not only on his ex-wife, but also on the majority of people. This was his mask for everyone. What's more, he treated even Larissa very coldly towards the victims, so she assumed that he behaved this way towards everyone. But now, after the stories that his assistant told her, she realized that she was wrong. After the bandage was finished, she was about to leave. The man escorted her to another room so that she could wait a while for a new bandage. Several hours passed, and Larissa came to his room again. His condition had worsened a little, so she even had to inject him with a special medicine. When she saw how much pain he was in, she herself felt uncomfortable. She didn't have time to inject him with medication and didn't notice that he was still sweating very heavily. Larissa took a small handkerchief that she always carried with her and was going to wipe his body, and only after that inject the special medicine. But the girl didn't have time to do this because the man suddenly woke up. He grabbed her hand and asked who she was. Of course, he thought that she was an enemy. Larissa was very worried then. Of course, she introduced herself and explained that she helped him, who was wounded by a poisoned arrow, at the request of his knights. In the end, the man believed her story and let the girl go. But he didn't even ask for forgiveness for how he acted. He only said that he appreciated the fact that she treated his wound, but said that that was enough. He just wanted her to leave. Of course, Larissa began to protest because she had not yet fully completed her treatment. But Antenna lost his temper and was furious, shouting at the girl. He told her to get out immediately. The girl was a little scared when she heard his scream. She started to fall from her chair, but the Antenna managed to react in time. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him. And at that moment, when their gazes crossed, he recognized her. He called her name and asked if it was really her. Of course, Larissa began to push away from him and said that he confused her with someone else. Despite his weakness, the Antennae had a very good grip, so he asked her not to lie to him. He asked again if that was her name. She didn't understand how this could happen. She didn't know how he recognized her, because she changed her hair, her name, and absolutely her entire appearance. But then suddenly, to her surprise, he quickly hugged her in a quiet voice, asking where she had been all this time, because he had been looking for her but could not find her. Larissa didn't want to reveal her identity until the very end. Therefore, she pushed him away and said that he had confused her with someone else. Antenna wasn't going to believe her. He continued to insist on his own. The girl pretended that she was very offended that he called her by some name unfamiliar to her. Then the man realized that most likely he really was mistaken, and she was a different lady. He asked her for forgiveness for making a mistake and being rude. Larissa at that moment stood up from her place. She said that at that moment I was still acting in his body, so he had to be careful. But before she left, she was going to inject him with a few more doses of the drug so that he wouldn't do it himself. The man didn't resist and allowed her to do it. She gave him some advice on what he should do with his hand, then gathered all her things and started to leave. But the antenna suddenly turned to her and said, "I had been with a woman for a long time who was incredibly similar to you, so I confused you." He explained that this girl was his wife. She had beautiful silver hair and eyes like amethysts. She was truly an incredible woman, and he missed her very much. Larissa didn't expect to hear this from him. All this time she thought that he had already forgotten about her. However, he said these words so tenderly that something in her heart skipped a beat. Even when they got married, he never complimented her on her beauty. So hearing that now was amazing for her. The girl suddenly stopped. She wanted to tell him something. She only explained that she definitely didn't look like the girl he was looking for because she had black hair and dark eyes. However, the man suddenly stood up from his seat, looked Larissa straight in the eyes and said that the structure of her hair and the way it curled were exactly like his wife's, and that was why he had confused them. The girl got even more angry at him. She simply threw the hood over her head and ran away. She ran so hard that she even dropped her scarf. The man tried to give it back to her, but she told him to just keep it for himself. The Duke's assistant came out to meet her. He said that the snow had not stopped yet, but had only gotten heavier, so he doubted whether she would be able to get home safely. Larissa said that this was not her problem. She also added that the man had already woken up, and in a normal state, she injected him with medicine so that he could visit his master. It's worth saying a few words about his antenna. There are a lot of people who considered him a monster. After all, he really did kill people mercilessly, but they weren't innocent. From an early age, he began to engage in this business. He calmly chopped off their heads and was not even afraid of the blood that got on his face and clothes. Eventually, he also began to consider himself a monster because war is a very strange thing. And despite the fact that he had to kill many people, he was considered a hero when he returned to his country. This man was despised by his enemies, but not by his admirers. He was a hero. However, the man did not think so. He considered himself an ordinary killer. Because of this, he was often tormented by nightmares at night about how he killed his victims. Each time, there were more and more of these people. He had to do it in cold blood. Otherwise, death would destroy him too. Antenna believed that war was a powerful drug that drove people crazy, and he was the craziest of them all, because while he was killing people, he felt absolutely nothing. And that was the most terrible thing. The man believed that it was certainly normal to feel guilt when you kill people, or pride when you kill enemies who entered your territory. But he felt nothing. He was indifferent. Quite often when he was in battle, he remembered the words of Larissa, who said that he didn't care what his hands did. She still considered them the most beautiful. Dark, cold evenings in the middle of the forest. This thought comforted the man. He often wanted to see her smile again, and wanted to finish killing people as soon as possible. In order to meet her again and rejoice at least a little, Larissa was truly an outlet for him. However, everything changed one terrible night when he returned to the estate and the girl ran away. For the man, this was a strong blow. He immediately ran to her room and saw that she had left him a gift and a note there. He was horrified. The man could not believe that she had actually done this. The only person who believed in him to the end simply remained. Now, along with the nightmares he faced during the war, he also had this terrible dream. Waking up in bed, he kept thinking that he had dreamed it and that she was in the bedroom. But reality turned out to be harsher than he thought. Every time I woke up alone in my bed, he understood that the girl had left, and he was left alone with his grief. Larissa was the only person he truly loved, so he sent a special battalion of people to look for her. But this search was unsuccessful. It was as if she had fallen into the ground. The maid told him that she had initially advised the girl to return home in order to clear her head, as she had already been in a very protracted depression. But her personal maid could not even imagine that the girl would want to finally run away. So for her, it was also a big surprise, because she did not think that Larissa could be capable of such a thing. Every time he got out of bed, it became more and more difficult for him. And now that his arm had recovered, he quite often began to remember the new girl he had met. For some unknown reason, she really reminded him of Larissa that evening. He hadn't been able to see the scarf, but now when he picked it up, he noticed that there were wisteria flowers on it, the family crest of Larissa's family. Despite the fact that the girl furiously claimed that it was not her, he was convinced of his own. He understood that it did not matter whether she had changed the color of her hair or her eyes. There was no doubt that that evening he met his wife, whom he had lost long ago. She had grown into a beautiful grown woman since he had last seen her, but even so, he knew immediately that it was her. Ant never imagined that they would be reunited in the way that happened last night. He didn't know if it was a cruel twist of fate or a blessing. The only thing he was absolutely sure of was that the girl would not forgive him as easily as he would like. But it didn't matter to him. No matter how much time it would take and how many resources he would like for her to still be with him again. After Larissa returned home the next day, Ronald immediately came to her to check if everything was okay with her. In fact, when he first came, she wasn't there, and because of this, he was very worried. But the girl explained the whole situation to him. So he calmed down and went about his business. And Larissa began her daily duties at Let's Go Shopping. Everything that happened last day felt like some kind of dream to her. She found herself in a situation where she met him again, but she really hoped that this would not happen again, because this meeting was too painful for her. She believed that they lived in completely different worlds, so there was no longer any need to even think about him. So the girl simply plunged headlong into work so that there were no distractions. For some reason, one of her clients began to warn the girl to be careful because there were many cases of kidnapping in their village. She had heard about this more than once, so she was very wary. The girl told her all the details, and Larissa agreed that she was going to take some measures to protect her shop. After all, he was far from the city. Therefore, in case of danger, she would not even have anyone to call for help after her client left. The happy girl was also happy. She understood that she had to protect herself on her own, so Larissa changed her appearance in order to go to the city and buy some means of self-defense. At that moment, she already thought that she would not have any clients. Therefore, she calmly went down from above. But then suddenly she heard that someone had arrived. She quickly began to go down the stairs and said that she would serve the client right away. Well, then she froze in place because she saw the man she hoped never to see in her life standing in front of her was her ex-husband. He looked at her without taking his eyes off her and did not even greet her. Larissa was a little confused at first, but then she put her worries aside and asked how she could help him. The girl was also happy that she managed to change her hair and eye color in time so as not to expose herself. The man came to thank her for what she did for him because she simply saved his life. The girl was incredibly surprised by his appearance because her store was very far away. And besides, she did not tell him his address, so she did not understand how he even knew where he was. But she didn't ask him about it because the man again sincerely asked her for forgiveness. Larissa became very embarrassed after this and asked if she could help him with anything else, since she had to run to the city. Of course, Antenna didn't want to let her go so easily. He started a conversation with her and said, "I heard that when you were treating me that day, you also took poison. So I would like to ask if everything was okay with you now." The girl replied that it didn't cause any problems for her, so he shouldn't worry about it. But the man continued to insist on his own, and he asked suspiciously if she really always used a similar method to treat her patients. Larissa explained to him how this usually happens. At that moment, the man came closer to her. He was truly very grateful to her for helping him, but asked that in the future she not expose herself to such danger. She didn't even know what to answer to this. The man only asked her to promise that she would not do such dangerous procedures again. The girl decided to simply agree, because she knew that otherwise he would not leave. But then, suddenly, Antenna took out a whole bag of money for his treatment. This was the payment, but the girl was very indignant when she saw this. Of course, she considered this very inappropriate, since she herself was in an unpayable debt to the garrison for what they do every day and risk their lives. They argued for some time, but Antenna still agreed to take the money, but asked that if she changed her mind, she be sure to let him know, and he would bring it immediately. For some time after that, they stood and looked at each other in silence. But after that, he said, as I thought, "I cannot calm my feelings just by doing this." So he asked her to allow him to invite her to dinner. Larissa did not expect to hear this. She immediately began to refuse, saying that she could not accept such an invitation. But Antenna wasn't going to leave with empty crayfish. She had a choice. Either she had to accept the gesture of gratitude in the form of a sum of money or go to dinner with him. She didn't have time to say anything because at that moment, the door to the office opened and her faithful friend walked in. Seeing that she had clients, he was about to leave but suddenly stopped. But Leah stopped him. She asked what had happened to him. He definitely didn't just come for no reason. The man said that they had dinner planned for that evening, so he came in order to go with her. Of course, Antenna was very indignant upon hearing this. He could not believe that she wanted to go to dinner with this man, but not with him. The girl was shocked. She didn't know how to get out of this situation. She explained that Ron was already like family to her, more than a friend. But the Antenna was very little. He wanted to know how close their relationship was. So he asked the girl to tell him what level of relationship they were at with Ron. She was very embarrassed to hear this, and before she could answer, His Highness's assistant, Sir Elliot, came into the pharmacy. He approached the girl and greeted her as well. He thanked her for the help she had provided. They had a short dialogue, but Antenna continued to stare intently only at the girl. He said that in a few days they would send someone to pick her up and told her to definitely come and not even think about running away. After all, if this happens, they will search with all their might until they find her for her. Larissa was about to object, but the man didn't listen to her. He simply turned around and left with his assistant, who was left wondering what exactly had happened. Ron, meanwhile, approached the girl and asked what all this was about. He didn't know this man. However, he made a great impression on him, and it seemed to him that he had seen him somewhere before. But Larissa did not tell all the details. She only explained that he was her new client and asked the man to go upstairs already because she had set the table and she would close the store and go up after him. But for some time, the girl just stood and watched behind the closed door where just a few minutes ago her ex-husband, the man with whom she had been in love for most of her life, stood. And so, when several days had passed since that moment, the man finally came to her and told her to finish her business and go with him to dinner. Of course, Larissa didn't expect that he would come on his own after that. He even sent her several boxes of outfits that she could wear to this dinner. She understood that everything he sent and she had to wear for dinner, the girl did not understand what he was thinking about and what he had planned. But it upset her incredibly because she did not want to get close to him again. In the end, Larissa dyed her hair again and was already riding in a carriage to meet a man. She wore a beautiful, fluffy blue dress that looked perfect on her. She couldn't imagine that she would ever have to wear something like that again. And because of this, terrible memories of their awkward and unpleasant dinners at the estate when they were still married came flooding back to her. For her, it was very uncomfortable because the man often finished his food still very happy. And after that, he said that he had a lot of work and therefore left her completely alone. Of course, Larissa didn't like all this, but she simply couldn't do anything. The maids laughed at her at that moment and didn't value her at all anymore. She tried to erase all these unpleasant moments from her memory, but unfortunately she failed. But as soon as she arrived at the palace, her experiences became even stronger. She was helped out of the carriage, and there Annalette immediately met her to escort her to the right place. She thanked him for the invitation and said that it was a pleasure for her to work with him, and that she was grateful for everything he had done for her. Elliot couldn't even take his eyes off her. The girl looked so amazing that evening. He even started flirting with her, although he knew that it wouldn't end well. When the girl went inside, her cape was taken away from her, and the man escorted her to a special dining room where dinner was to be held for her. They were having a polite conversation. The man asked how her trip went and whether she had anything new. So he told about His Highness's mood. He was not in the best mood. As soon as she entered the banquet hall, Antenna also hurried there. He was accompanied by other knights and was carrying some important papers, and was also talking about something very emotionally. When the girl saw him again in this form, her heart fluttered again, but she also became very sad. The girl was upset because she had already seen this scene many times when she was married to him. He always walked around accompanied by his assistants and talked about some work matters. He couldn't even find time for dinner with his wife. Even now, when she looked at him without stopping, the man looked at her with a tired look, as if he even regretted that she had come. And this look changed very quickly, because when he saw what exactly she was wearing, he simply could not restrain himself. The man quickly ran up to her and pulled her closer to his chest. The girl did not understand what was happening at all. She was sincerely scared, of course. She even felt awkward about this situation. But he held her tightly, so she could not even get out of his arms. She quietly asked him to let go of her antenna, and he did it anyway. He even asked her for forgiveness for being so rude, and he also praised her appearance because she really looked simply amazing. They had a small, awkward conversation. The girl thanked him for the dress. He said that he was glad that she liked it. This conversation was interrupted by one of the knights, who asked where he needed to take the document and also to find out some other points about their work. It was at that moment that something happened that the girl certainly didn't expect to hear, because the man took all the documents and said that he would not be working now. After that, he gave them to his assistant and said that during dinner, Elliot would be the one handling all of this, so they should contact him with any questions. The girl knew how important the work was for him, so she asked if everything was okay and if he would like to solve all the problems first and only then start dinner. Well, the man replied that everything was fine. His assistant was definitely able to handle these matters, so he wanted to rely on him. Larissa continued to insist on her man, eventually stopped and, looking her straight in the eyes, said, "This will never end if I don't share this. Therefore, I think that talking to you will be much more important than solving these useless constant questions." He also hoped that she would have a good time with him at dinner. Then they came and sat down at the table. The man poured them some expensive red wine. He was happy that he could finally eat in the company of his wife, even if under a different name. The man decided to talk about her work because he was interested in the details. What had she been doing all this time while she was not next to him? The girl told him some subtleties about when she opened the store. He was incredibly interested. In fact, he always loved listening to Larissa's conversations, although he never showed it. The girl often fell silent. However, when she talked about her favorite thing, that very smile that he loved most appeared on her face. The girl herself felt very uncomfortable. She really hoped that he wouldn't look at her for as long as he did for half the evening, because she couldn't even put food in her mouth. She felt uncomfortable. For some reason, Larissa always felt like he was analyzing her and trying to find some flaw. But in reality, this was not the case. The man could finally admire his beloved woman after so long. He also said that he was very impressed when he came to her store. After all, she had a very large assortment of different herbs. In addition, it was a rather rare one that you can't always find on their continent. The girl explained that she really loved growing them herself, so she was able to discover some species for herself. However, she became worried and asked how he knew so much about different herbs. Of course, Antenna knew all this because his wife loved herbs, and he always listened to what she said. And she talked to us for a long time and told us various fascinating things. Larissa, of course, was very surprised. She never thought that he listened to all these conversations. She always thought that he simply kept silent out of politeness and pretended as if he was interested. But the man said that his wife looked like she was enjoying herself when she was talking passionately. And that, of course, made him very happy too. When the girl heard this, she blushed. She immediately began to drink wine quickly in order to calm down a little. It must have been really hard for her, but the man also said that his wife also told him a lot of useful things that turned out to be incredibly useful on the battlefield. He told her exactly what she said and how it could be useful to them. So the girl was even more surprised because she herself did not suspect that he could also use it in practice. Larissa thought all this was incredibly strange. She thought it would be difficult for her to have lunch with him. However, in fact, once the awkward conversations had passed and the atmosphere had improved, she even liked it. Besides, they only talked about trivial things that didn't bother her that much. She would never have thought that the day could come when they would again be able to communicate on various unimportant topics. Also at that moment, she thought that if everything had been exactly like this from the beginning, then she would definitely have had a different attitude towards the man, and perhaps their destinies would not have diverged, and they would have remained happy spouses. But the girl could not know for sure because she began to think about all this. Then the man, of course, noticed that something was bothering her, but the girl did not confess to him. After they finished their dinner, Larissa was already thinking about leaving. However, the man asked her to stay a little longer because he wanted to show her something incredible. Looking at her watch, she realized that she still had a lot of time, but for some reason she didn't want to stay. but Antenna insisted on his own. He said that he would take her home, so she didn't have to worry. He just hoped that she would actually go with him. In the end, the girl agreed and said that if it only took a little time, then she was ready to go. Her ex-husband was very happy about this, so they started to climb up. He even gave her his hand so that she wouldn't fall. Before they went out to the place where he was leading them, the man threw a cape over her shoulders because it was quite cold there, so he didn't want her to freeze. And when they went out the door, the girl realized that they were, on the roof above them, were beautiful stars on which the Milky Way was visible. She certainly didn't expect to see such a romantic gesture from a man. He hugged her, and they began to look at these stars together. He told her where each constellation was located, and also in which pairs of the year one could see special star structures. Of course, Antenna was very happy that she liked everything, and then, for the first time in a very long time, he saw a smile on the girl's face, and it was very sincere, because Larissa was getting real pleasure from this. They talked for a while about different things. He even made the girl laugh a little. That evening was filled with special feelings of nostalgia and notes of flirtation. Of course, Larissa was also surprised to realize the fact that such a gentle man like him could command all the knights of the empire. And she also thought that he was a truly good person in his field. While they were standing there on the street, it was getting colder and colder. The man suggested that she go back because he noticed how cold she was. He wanted to take her hand, but because Larissa had many scars on her palms, she did not let him do it. But in the end, he still noticed the marks on her hands. He took out the ointment that she had once given him and immediately anointed them. When Larissa saw this, she was incredibly amazed. She didn't know that he could save this ointment and keep it for so many years. Looking him straight in the eyes, she smiled and thanked him. After that, she said that she already had to go back because it was already completely dark outside, and it was getting quite late. The man, of course, was a little upset because she wanted to go back right now, but Larissa still had a lot of work in the morning, so she just had to do it. The girl also asked how she could give him the dress, but the man forbade her to do this, and in the end, they agreed that in the future he would never do this again, because she felt very awkward. Larissa never wanted to see them together again. She understood that they would not have a future. Even though it was very painful for her that she could not be with him, she understood that it was only for the better. After the girl ran away, the man asked the maid to prepare a carriage for her to take her home. Of course, the Antenna would really like to negotiate with her. He wanted to run after her and hold her slender body close to him. However, he understood that the girl did not want this, so he simply had no right to do so. He wanted their relationship to improve, but if he put pressure on her, she would only become more distant. Therefore, the man kept his composure. His Larissa was no longer the same as before. He just needed to come to terms with this fact. Although even this thought alone made his chest clench. It was incredibly painful for him to realize the fact that she had changed so much and had become distant from him. At the same time, he was going to return to the office to look through all the documents that the elite had put aside for him, so he was going to stay late at work. After he went to his office, he couldn't stop thinking about that soft, light blue dress, as well as the girl's beautiful transparent skin and her shiny combed hair. Throughout the rest of the evening, the girl occupied all his thoughts in his head. He could not concentrate on anything because she was so beautiful, and he missed her so much. He understood that now, after several years, she had truly become a woman, and he was happy that the girl he had been looking for about 4 years was finally right in front of him. And unlike the others, he was delighted. However, he thought that he was the only one who felt this way. For some reason, he was not sure that the girl was also happy to see him. Until now, I was not entirely sure why she left him. However, I understood that now she would still deny everything, so even asking about it was useless. The first war that Antenna had to go through was truly very cruel. Many of his comrades lost their lives every day, leaving their bodies and minds completely damaged. Since these were only the first years of their marriage, the girl still greeted him cheerfully. She was truly glad that he returned safe and sound, and it was a great honor for her to see him on such evenings. Well, Antenna wasn't as cheerful as she was then, and the first attempts to ignore the girl began. He simply walked past her and locked himself in his office. Of course, he couldn't help but think about the horrors he saw in the war, and therefore he simply couldn't see the girl's happy face. For some reason unknown to him, she did not consider him a monster. Although the man was exactly that in his opinion, and therefore he could not watch her justify him when innocent people were dying. He then truly believed that he did not need to get closer to her, so he kept his distance from her, avoiding various meetings with the girl. Although he did not even suspect that in this way, he was making their situation even worse. And when he went on another mission, he met another death there. The man knew that the people you see now might never be able to see again, so he did not understand how he could forget such an obvious thing. And when he said goodbye to another of his close friends in the war, his assistant approached him and said that the Lord of the West had been killed quite recently. It was a big surprise and a blow to him. His assistant said that the information had reached them late and that it had actually happened several weeks ago. The man could not believe that the Lord, who was as strong as a demon, was killed on his mission. For him, it was something incredible. He did not understand how this could even happen. One day, but first of all, he thought about what would happen to the girl when she found out that her father had died. Of course, he was incredibly scared for Larissa. He immediately believed that he had to go back to meet her and understand how he could support her. But then the bell rang in their village, which warned of the approach of enemies. That is why he had to stay behind. He sent all the knights and led them for some time, repelling attacks. And when everything was finally over, he returned home. Well, there he found only an empty bed and a note from his dear Larissa, namely a farewell note. He could not believe that it was true that she really left him. Of course, he immediately went to her childhood home. However, when he got there, he saw that the house was abandoned and deserted, so it was obvious that she was not there. But as he later learned, not only the servants and property were put up for sale, but also the estate itself. Ultimately, the entire ducal family of the Vesteria was deprived of their title, and this meant that the girl disappeared without leaving a single trace behind. Then he was in agony. The man did not know where she could be, and he also understood that if he was not there, he would not be able to protect her in any way, and accordingly, she could get into any danger. And this was his scarecrow. Then he swore to himself that they would stop until he found a girl, and many years passed. However, he was unable to do this, but the man still did not give up. Ultimately, one day, a maid who served the girl and had a normal relationship with her decided to confess to all the atrocities that the servants committed. They very often did not send the letters that were supposed to be addressed to the man and gave her spoiled food. The attitude from them was simply terrible. So in the end, the man, of course, fired them. He couldn't believe that these people who had served him for so many years could do this to his wife. And besides, he blamed himself, because for some reason he couldn't have been more attentive to the girl in order to notice at least some alarming signs. A few months later, he found out where exactly the girl lived. However, the count with whom she lived upset him because he told her that at one point she decided to take her life into her own hands, and for this reason left. He also told the antenna that he offered to help her with work and everything like that, but the girl refused. So the man was again left alone with his worries. Now he couldn't even imagine where exactly she could be. But while the Duke was searching for his wife, everyone around him was saying that he should just give up and find a new one. But of course, the man always refused. He truly valued his relationship with Larissa and had no intention of looking for anyone else. For him, this would be simply unthinkable. He knew perfectly well that he was an egoist. However, he still could not live without her. He needed this girl and no one could replace her. So now that he had finally found her, but in a different guise, the man swore to himself that he would act carefully and would definitely win her trust again. When the next day after the party came, the man was in his office, sorting through a lot of paperwork. The recent increase in kidnappings made him a little wary, as the kidnappers were experienced in their crimes, so it took time to identify their hideout and punish them. One day, at the crime scene, the police discovered a magical tool, so it became likely that Viscount Diode Gold was involved in all this. He was a minor nobleman who never had enough of anything. The man, of course, was wary, because he understood that Larissa could easily become the next victim. So he was very afraid, and thought about how he could protect her. He was also wary of the magical instruments that were often used for dangerous purposes, and were not supposed to be sold without special permission. So he was curious where the Viscount got them from. Of course, he would really like to catch this criminal, but it was difficult for him to concentrate because Larissa constantly intruded into his thoughts. He saw her just yesterday, but he already missed her incredibly much and wanted to meet again. After this, his assistant came to him and brought the report that the man had asked him for in advance. He also said that the man was right in his suspicions, because they were indeed attacked by a group of kidnappers. It looked as if they had heard the information from somewhere and therefore set up an ambush in advance. But even despite this, they did not have enough information to catch these criminals red-handed or even put them away. Therefore, they needed to continue the investigation. But his assistant also warned the man that there had been numerous reports of suspicious figures wandering around the area near Leah's residence. Hearing this, he immediately became wary. Of course, he understood that he could not harm them on his own, because that would be a crime. But he also could not go there as protection, because the girl would not even let him in the door. Of course, he incredibly strongly wanted to protect Larissa, but he could not even imagine that she would follow him, given everything that had happened between them. His assistant agreed with the man and said that he was very sorry that they could not protect her. But even if that was the case, they could have allowed her to capture the criminal, and then they themselves would have dealt with him. This would definitely have helped to expose the lair of these criminals. But of course the antenna didn't like this idea. He asked, what if before they start storming, the criminals find out about this and take it away after escaping? They couldn't just take it and risk it. It was too dangerous. Well, his assistant calmed her down and immediately explained how the situation should have happened, and also added that before they thought out the plan in detail, he would like His Highness to simply first convince her to cooperate with them. And all because if the girl refuses, then their plan, of course, won't work. So it was impossible to get ahead of yourself, while the exact answer was still unknown. After a short silence, his assistant asked who Leah was to him anyway, since he was so worried about her, and she was essentially a stranger at first glance. The man explained that she was, after all, his wife, and therefore it was quite obvious that he was worried. Only the men heard this and were very shocked. He screamed loudly and asked, "Does this mean that Miss Leah is the daughter of Duke Isaac? That is, Lady Larissa?" The man confirmed this information, but his assistant could not believe that this was really true, because she had disappeared a long time ago. And besides, he would never have thought that I could be a different person. So now his assistant was tired. It was clear to him why the man so fiercely wanted to protect the girl, and why he should not have put her in danger. Now the most important question was how exactly he could convince Larissa. Of course, he wanted to protect her, but he also had to take her feelings into account. So this task was incredibly difficult. At that very moment, Larissa was nearby in the forest, as always, collecting the necessary herbs for her decoctions, and did not even notice how quickly everything darkened. She quickly began to return back to her home and thought about the fact that after that dinner, she never met the man again. At some point, it even seemed to her that he was angry with her and therefore did not contact her in any way. She thought about different things, but she still didn't understand why she felt so uneasy, because she shouldn't have cared what Antenna thought or felt. She tried to forget him with all her might, because he had hurt her tender feelings. And while she was searching through the forest, she was scared many times by some sharp sounds. She immediately remembered the words of Ron and that customer who talked about dangerous people circling around their village. Back then, she didn't take them seriously for some reason, but now that she was completely alone in the middle of a dark forest, she became incredibly scared. That's why Larissa wanted to return home as soon as possible. It would be much safer, because it wasn't good to stay alone in the forest for so long. She started to offend him and kept thinking about how she should act and protect herself in the future if something happened. The girl decided that as soon as she returned to her store, she would definitely tell Ron about it. Larissa had an obsessive feeling as if someone was watching her. She even heard someone's footsteps in the grass. The girl stopped and screamed loudly, asking who was there. At that moment, Ron's words kept running through her head, saying that these criminals make a lot of noise, so they can be heard right away and try to escape. Larissa didn't stop any longer. She understood that even if it seemed that way to her, it was better to be on the safe side. So she started crying and running even faster to get out of this forest as quickly as possible. Then suddenly she heard a familiar voice. It belonged to the Antenna. A man on his big black horse jumped out of nowhere, Anne, seeing her tears, asked if everything was okay with her and whether she was injured. She certainly didn't expect to see him there. The girl came closer to him and asked what he was doing there. The man was only happy that she was safe and that nothing bad had happened to her. At that moment, the antenna hugged her. He said that he was very worried because he heard that she went into the forest and still hadn't returned. And he was also happy that nothing bad happened to her. The girl also hugged him back with trembling hands, asking for forgiveness for causing him so much trouble. They stood hugging for a while, and then he said that no matter where she was and no matter what happened, he would always be there and would come to her aid. Larissa immediately tried to push away from him. She understood that this could not continue. If she stayed in his arms for just one more minute, she would forgive him everything, and her feelings would flare up again with renewed vigor. So they were about to leave back to her house, when suddenly one of the knights galloped up, and the man gave him directions so that he could look around the area because he thought that they could still be hiding nearby. Antenna sat her on the horse, then sat behind her, and told her to hold on very tightly and not fall. They would try to ride quite fast in order to get out of this place as quickly as possible. While they were driving, the man started a conversation and asked what she was doing alone in the middle of the forest at such a late hour. Larissa explained that she was simply collecting some necessary medications that she had run out of. Of course, the girl already knew all this, but she didn't want to burden Ron because of this. Then the antenna, seeing her hesitation, said that he was now next to her, so she could ask him to go with her if something happened. Larissa certainly didn't expect such a proposal. She thought it was very strange, and said that he probably had a lot of work, so she couldn't ask him about something like that. Well, the man insisted on his own, and said that there were no problems with this for Larissa at that moment, because he even moved her closer to him so that she would not fall off the horse. Of course, the girl did not want to experience the feelings that she had before. However, she could not help herself. For some reason, her heart was fluttering, even though her brain told her that it was wrong. Even if she was counting on some kind of normal relationship with the man, it was all very stupid because he would become cold towards her again, and she definitely would not be able to experience this pain a second time. After some time, they finally got to her house. Larissa thanked him for giving her a ride and helping her, after which she turned around and began to go inside. But the man asked her to stop. He said, "After everything, I feel that it is dangerous to leave you alone this evening." So he asked if she could go with him to his garrison. The girl, of course, refused this because it was too much. The man did not understand why she refused and even got angry at such irresponsibility on her part. When Antenna couldn't contain his emotions, he yelled at her and said that if something happens in a secluded house on the outskirts of the city, it will be too late before anyone notices and can help you. He really wanted her to allow him to protect her. Larissa, hearing these screams, immediately became upset. All this brought back terrible memories from the past, so she did not want to stay with him even for a minute longer. She said that she always defended herself and continued to do so. She was grateful to him for his help and concern, but he shouldn't have done this at all. After this, Larissa turned around and was about to go into her house, but she didn't have time because Antenna grabbed her hand. He pulled her towards him and said that this time he would definitely protect her. That's why he wanted her to go with him. He began to hug her tightly and say various pleasant words to Larissa, of course. She would like to believe in them, but she simply could not remain alone. It was scary in the dark forest after what had happened to her. But if she relies on him, she knows very well that she will simply be disappointed again. Therefore, she was finally able to refuse him. The man was still very angry with her, but he did not want to put even more pressure on her. Therefore, turning around, he finally accepted the situation as it was. As he left, the Antenna looked at her with a very stern look. He did not understand why Larissa was so stubborn, because it concerned her safety. But he could not do anything. Then the girl was left completely alone again. When she entered her house, she noticed that it was quite cold there. So the first thing the girl did was light a fire to warm up her hut a little. At that moment, various terrible thoughts began to creep into her head, which worried her even more. She thought that when she was next to a man, she never felt cold. Of course she was not cold, but even when she was with him, she was lonely. The girl decided to dispel all these terrible thoughts a little. She brewed herself some hot tea in order to warm up, but in the end these thoughts took hold of her. She squatted down and began to cry bitterly because she knew that she was completely alone. At that moment, she realized that since he appeared in her life again, she would like him to be next to her always, even despite the fact that he caused her a lot of mental pain. Larissa, having calmed down a little, sat in front of the fire. She fell asleep and therefore did not even notice how someone had sneaked into her house. This unknown person had put out her fire. The girl woke up because she felt a sharp cold that came as soon as she opened her eyes, and she immediately realized that something was wrong. She looked around the room and asked if anyone was walking there. In the end, this man walked around her from behind. He was a real professional. He covered her mouth with his hands so that she would not scream and attract unnecessary attention. Meanwhile, other men grabbed her by the arms. The only thing Larissa could do was grab the tablecloth and drop the teapot with tea, after which she disappeared without a trace into the shadows. The next time she opened her eyes, she was already in some unknown carriage. Her hands were tied and there was a gag in her mouth. Larissa was beside herself with horror. She didn't know what had happened to her or where they were taking her, but she was so scared that she couldn't even resist. The girl didn't know what to do. When she saw where exactly they started carrying her, the girl hit her with her hands and feet, and eventually the man threw her on the ground and told her to calm down. Otherwise, it would only get worse for her. Soon after that, she was very rudely picked up and taken to some kind of cell where she had to sit for some time. These people who kidnapped her treated the girl very rudely. Larissa, of course, did not expect good behavior towards herself because, after all, they were the kidnappers. They closed the cage behind them and told her to enjoy her own company. Of course, the girl was in despair. She didn't know what to do and where they had brought her, and she didn't know who these people were. She didn't know anything at all, and this scared her even more. Well, then one thought came to her mind. She realized that these people would probably want to make her a slave, and this prospect, of course, did not please the girl. Larissa was almost certain of this, and all because slavery was prohibited in their empire. But some vassal states still continued to allow these things. They did not hesitate to protect people and enrich the black market at the expense of the slave trade. The empire closed the markets, but the slave trade never stopped because it was simply profitable for many people. So they calmly negotiated with the authorities and did what they wanted. Larissa understood that if this was for robot trading, then they probably only kidnap women in most cases and abuse them very cruelly. She also suggested that perhaps they could use these slaves for their own pleasure. In fact, these assumptions were not taken out of thin air. Several years ago, a girl went into a bar and heard several men talking about all this. They discussed how they would get pleasure from some women. However, from the context, it was clear that all this would happen against the will of these very poor girls. Of course, Larissa was shocked, but now that she found herself in the same situation, the girl understood that she had to somehow escape at any cost. But her hands were incredibly tightly tied. She couldn't even move her name. It would have been very helpful for her to have, for example, some kind of knife so that she could untie herself. And then a thought flashed through her head about what her ex-husband had said. He understood that something bad could probably happen to her, and that's why he was afraid. But Larissa, because of her stubbornness, did not listen to him and now found herself in this terrible situation. She was wondering what was wrong with him now. Perhaps he would come the next morning and see that she was not at home and that something had happened. She really hoped that this would happen and that he would start looking for her. She wanted an army to be sent for her and free her, but she didn't know if that would really happen. Therefore, in this situation, at that moment, she could only rely on herself. Having burst into tears, Larissa reproached herself for some time. She understood that she should not have refused his help. And now, if she had the opportunity, she would definitely ask him for forgiveness for her stubbornness and would agree to help. Some time passed since then, and those terrible kidnappers came to her again. One of them brought another man. He was in a suit and said that this girl was pretending to be from the East, and this man was their boss. The men looked at her for a while, then asked them to take her out because he wanted to look at her closer. Then one of the guards came up and blindfolded her so that she could not see where they were taking her. Larissa tried to push herself out, but nothing worked for her. In the end, she was brought into some room. She felt a light. The girl understood that something bad was about to happen because she was left alone with some person. Everyone else just left. But at that moment, the bandage was removed from her. She felt a gentle hand that touched her. The girl immediately looked into the face of the man who was left alone with her. It turned out that it was not a man at all, as Larissa had assumed. It was a young girl with blonde hair. She asked in a gentle voice if everything was okay with the girl, because her face was very swollen. Larissa didn't understand at all what was happening, but the girl held her hands and said that she would definitely report it, but first she needed to apply something cold to him, and also bathe her properly. The girl didn't understand what she wanted from her at all. She herself asked if there was any way to return her hair to its original color. And all because I liked dark-haired people among her clients. Larissa understood that resisting in this situation was absolutely useless. Therefore, she said that everything would wash off with plain water. After some time, she took a hot bath, and her light hair color really returned. The girl was glad to see this at that moment. One of the kidnappers burst in on them, but this unknown person covered Larissa with her body, so that he would not even think of coming closer to her. The man explained that the paint had run out, so he was going to file a report, and he also asked the girl to go and decorate it as soon as possible, since they didn't have much time left. Some time passed from that moment. I dressed Larissa in rather revealing underwear, tied her hair. She looked very attractive in a sexual way. After that, she was brought to the boss to show the man was very pleased with what he saw. He said that she looked just right, and so they could start their show. How could he have thought that they would surely be happy to see something bright and joyful? Larissa was simply terrified. It was the worst feeling she had ever experienced. The girl didn't even know what she would have to do, but she knew that it would be disgusting. When the show finally started, this man began to take the girls out in a cage. All of them were dressed and quite openly tied up and gagged so that they could not speak. The absent people had to leave their bids in order to buy this girl. They all wore masks so that no one would recognize them. Soon the first lot was sold. Some time had passed since many girls had already been sold. And finally the time had come for Larissa to be put up for sale. And they said that this was their final lot and the most important one. He made a pretty high first bet. They gradually began to increase. And then one fat, nasty man made the highest bet, which even amazed everyone present. No one else dared to raise her, and the auctioneer was about to end this auction. But he didn't have time because a high-pitched male voice sounded, voicing an even higher bid for this girl. No one present expected such a turn of events. This man was not only wearing a mask, he was also dressed in dark clothes with a hood. He simply raised his hand and bet 30 million to buy out Larissa. Of course, the auctioneer was very amazed. People began to doubt that he would be able to buy this girl. They did not think that he had this money. But the fat man wanted this lady more than anything else, so he made a bid higher than the previous one. Of course, the man was not going to back down. He bet higher and higher, and when the bet was already 100 million, the girl was sold to him. He climbed onto the stage and asked to be given the keys to the cage. He took these keys and immediately began walking towards Larissa. At that moment, Larissa was already indifferent. She understood that some terrible pervert had probably bought her out, and she assumed that her life was over. Her survival instinct told her to fight, but her brain refused. Eventually, the man came up and opened the cage. She turned away from him as best she could. She didn't want him to touch her at all. Then suddenly a very familiar voice sounded. It belonged to the antenna. She immediately understood it. The man, wiping away her tears, said, "I told you. I will come for you wherever you are." He also said that he would immediately take her from there, after which he gave a special sign to his knights, who were already hiding at the exit, so that they would arrest everyone present for slave trading. After this, the man took off his mask and looked Larissa straight in the eyes. The girl could not believe that it was really him. She did not understand how he managed to find her and pull off all this, but she was very pleased. He took off these shackles from her. The girl cried and said in a trembling voice that she was incredibly scared, so she could no longer think about anything. She thought that something bad would happen to her.